A madam opened the door of her upscale brothel in Miami, Florida, and was greeted by a sharp-dressed, confident man in his late 40s. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. "I'm here to see Isabella," he said. The madam raised an eyebrow. "Isabella is our top girl, very expensive. Perhaps you'd prefer someone else?" He shook his head. "No, it has to be Isabella." A moment later, Isabella arrived and said, "My rate is $10,000. Without blinking, the man handed over the money, and they went upstairs. An hour later, he quietly left. The next evening, he returned. Isabella was surprised. Not many come back at that price. Still, he paid again and went upstairs. On the third night, he showed up once more. By now, everyone was stunned. Again, he paid the $10,000 and spent the hour with her. Afterward, Isabella couldn't help but ask, "No one's ever come back like this. Where are you from?" He replied, "Chicago." She smiled. "Really? I've got family in Chicago." He nodded. "I know. Your sister passed away recently. I'm her lawyer. She asked me to personally deliver your $30,000 inheritance." Moral of the story: in life, 3 things are guaranteed: death, taxes, and when a relative dies, getting screwed by a lawyer. A Japanese gentleman was visiting the United States for the first time. He'd seen America on television for years and was excited to finally experience it in person. On the last day of his trip, he climbed into a taxi and asked the driver to take him to the airport. As they drove along the highway, a Honda zoomed past the cab. The man leaned toward the window, clapped his hands, and exclaimed, "Ah! Honda, very fast! Made in Japan!" A few minutes later, a Toyota flew by. Again, he leaned out excitedly and said, "Toyota, very fast! Made in Japan!" Soon after that, a Mitsubishi sped past them. Once again, the man smiled proudly and shouted, "Mitsubishi, very fast! Made in Japan!" By now, the taxi driver was getting a little irritated, but he kept quiet and continued driving. Finally, they arrived at the airport. The driver stopped the car and said, "That'll be $300. The Japanese gentleman's eyes went wide. $300? That's very expensive." The taxi driver smiled and replied, "Meter, very fast. Made in Japan." An old man had always wanted a real pair of Texas cowboy boots. So when he finally saw a good pair on sale, he bought them on the spot and proudly wore them home. He walked into the kitchen and said to his wife, "Notice anything different about me?" She looked him over and said, "Nope." A little annoyed, he stomped off to the bathroom. A minute later, he came back into the kitchen, wearing nothing but the boots. He stood there proudly and asked again, louder this time, "Okay, notice anything different now?" His wife glanced up and said calmly, "Robert, what's different? It was hanging down yesterday. It's hanging down today. And it'll be hanging down tomorrow." Now he was furious. "And do you know why it's hanging down, Margaret?" he shouted. She shrugged. "No idea," he snapped. "Because it's looking at my new boots." His wife sighed and said, "Should have bought a hat, Robert. Should have bought a hat." A pastor is sitting in his small-town church office when a fellow comes in and asks to confess his sins. "Well now, son," says the pastor, "have a seat and tell me what's on your heart." "Pastor," the man begins, "on Monday I was over at my girlfriend's house. We were alone, the place was empty, and I gave in to temptation." The pastor sighs gently and says, "We all stumble, son. Say a few prayers and ask the Lord's forgiveness." But it didn't stop there. The man continues, "On Tuesday I went back, and she was out with her friends. The only one home was her sister, and we were alone, and I sinned again." The pastor clears his throat. "You must be stronger than that. Say 10 prayers this time." "And on Wednesday," the man says, I stopped by again. She wasn't home, just her mother, and well, I messed up again. Good heavens, the pastor mutters. You really need to work on your self-control. Thursday I went over, and only her aunt was there, the man says. Friday it was her grandma. The pastor is now staring at the ceiling. And Saturday, the man continues, I went back and the only one home was her dad. There is a long silence. Pastor? The man asks. What do you think I should do? But there's no answer. The man steps outside and looks up, only to see the pastor climbing a ladder toward the church steeple. Pastor! The man calls. Where are you going? The pastor looks down and says, Son, the church is empty, the two of us are alone, and I'm not sticking around to find out what happens next. Old Man Earl lived out on a peaceful country road just outside a small Midwestern town, but over the years the traffic picked up until cars were flying past his place day and night. Before long, his free-range chickens were getting run over 3 or 4 times a week. So Earl called the sheriff's office and said, You've got to do something about these folks speeding past my house and flattening my chickens. The deputy replied, What do you want me to do about it? I don't care, Earl said. Just slow those crazy drivers down. The next day the county put up a big sign that read, School crossing. 3 days later Earl called again. That sign isn't helping. If anything, they're driving faster. So the county replaced it with another sign, Slow, children at play. That didn't work either. Earl called back and said, Your signs aren't doing a lick of good. Mind if I put up my own? The deputy sighed and said, Go ahead. After that, the calls from Earl stopped. Curious, the deputy phoned him a week later and asked, How's the speeding problem? Did you put up your sign? Oh, I sure did, Earl said. And not a single chicken's been hit since. Now the deputy was mighty curious, so he drove out to see for himself. When he pulled up and read the sign, he just about fell over laughing. It said, Nudist community ahead, please slow down and watch for chicks. A young woman sat next to an elderly man on a plane. She alerted the flight attendant when she took her seat. The flight attendant reacted warmly when the woman abruptly declared, Please find me another seat immediately. She replied, I'm sorry, madam, but the economy cabin is full. The woman replied, But I'm not going to travel with a useless old man. Do something. While the old man stared at him incredulously, the flight attendant. He replied, I'll speak to the captain about it. The flight attendant went to see the captain and asked him, Captain, a woman feels uncomfortable sitting next to a poor old man. What should we do? To his great surprise, the captain's expression changed. He seemed amused and said, This woman is interesting. I've never encountered a problem like this. I have a plan. Listen. The captain explained his plan to the flight attendant. She was stunned, even surprised. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returned. The captain told us we have an empty seat in first class and to use it up. He also wanted to apologize for forcing us to travel with such an unpleasant person. As the woman rose smiling from her seat, the flight attendant extended her arm towards the old man. Sir, please follow me. The whole plane applauded. Never look down on others. We are all equal in the eyes of God. Whatever your accomplishments, remain humble and keep your feet on the ground. Time flies, that's the worst part. But you are the master of your own destiny. A sweet little old lady went to the store and, having selected the most expensive cat food, placed it in her cart. At the checkout, she proudly told the cashier, Nothing but premium dinner for my baby. The cashier looked at the old lady and replied, Sorry, ma'am, you can't buy this without proof that you actually own a cat. Shocked and more than a little surprised, she went home and returned with her fur baby. The cashier took a look at the kitten and processed the transaction. The following day, she was back at the store and loaded her cart with premium dog food. At the checkout, she smiled and said, Nothing but premium chow for my puppy. The clerk replied, Again, the same routine, ma'am, I need proof you have a dog. So, again she went home, brought back her puppy, and bought the food. However, the following day, she came back carrying a small cardboard box with a hole cut out of the lid. She asked the cashier to stick her finger inside the hole. The clerk was hesitant at first, then did it. She then quickly pulled out her finger, looked at it, gave it a sniff and said, "You! That smells like poop!" The old lady gave a smile and said, "Yep. 3 rolls of toilet paper, please." A wily old farmer got pulled over by a state trooper for speeding, and the trooper started to lecture him about his speed and, in general, began to throw his weight around to try to make the old guy feel uncomfortable. Finally, the trooper got around to writing out the ticket, and as he was doing that, he kept swatting at some flies that were buzzing around his head. The old farmer said, "Having some problems with circle flies there, are you?" The trooper stopped writing the ticket and said, "Well, yeah, if that's what they are, but I've never heard of circle flies." So the farmer says, "Well, circle flies are common on farms. See, they're called circle flies because they're almost always found circling around the back end of a horse." The trooper says, "Oh," and goes back to writing the ticket. Then after a minute he stops and says, "Hey, wait a minute, are you trying to call me a horse's ass?" The farmer says, "Oh no, officer. I have too much respect for law enforcement and police officers to even think about calling you a horse's ass." The trooper says, "Well, that's a good thing," and goes back to writing the ticket. After a long pause, the farmer says softly, "Hard to fool those flies, though." An elderly lady was walking down the street dragging 2 trash bags behind her, a large one and a much smaller one. The larger one had a tear in it, and every so often a $20 bill would fall out onto the pavement. A police officer noticed and stopped her. "Ma'am, you've got money falling out of that bag." "Oh dear," she said. "I'd better go back and pick it up." "Thanks for telling me, officer." "Hold on," he said. "Where did you get all that money? You didn't steal it, did you?" She smiled and said, No, my backyard backs up to a football stadium parking lot. On game days, fans sneak over and use a hole in my fence instead of the restroom. It was ruining my garden. So I came up with a plan. I stand quietly by the fence with my hedge clippers. Every time someone sticks their tallywhacker through the hole, I grab it and say, $20, or else. The officer burst out laughing. Well, I suppose that's one way to handle it. So what's in the other bag? She shrugged and said, Well, not everybody pays. A man tells his wife he's heading out to buy cigarettes. When he gets to the store, it's closed, so he pops into a bar to use the vending machine instead. While there, he has a couple of beers and starts chatting with a beautiful woman. One drink turns into several, and before he knows it, he's at her apartment having a great time. The next thing he realizes, it's 3 a.m. Oh no, my wife is going to kill me! He panics. Quick, give me some talcum powder! She hands him some, and he rubs it all over his hands before rushing home. When he walks in, his wife is waiting, and she's furious. Where have you been? He sighs and says, Honestly? I went to a bar, had a few drinks, met a woman, went back to her place, and slept with her. Let me see your hands, she snaps. He shows her his powder-covered hands. She glares at him and says, Don't lie to me, you've been out bowling again. During the wedding rehearsal, the groom pulled the minister aside and said, Look, I'll give you $100 if you leave out the part about love, honor, obey, and be faithful forever. Just skip it. The minister took the money and nodded. On the big day, when it was time for the vows, the minister looked the groom straight in the eye and said, Do you promise to obey her every wish, serve her breakfast in bed every morning, and never even look at another woman as long as you both shall live? The groom gulped and quietly said, Yes. Then he leaned in and whispered, I thought we had a deal. The minister slipped the $100 back into his hand and said, She made me a better offer. There were these two elderly people living in a Florida mobile home park. He was a widower, and she a widow. They had known one another for several years. Now, one evening, there was a community supper in the big activity center. These two were at the same table, facing each other. As the meal went on, he made a few admiring glances at her and finally gathered up his courage to ask her, "Will you marry me?" After a dramatic pause and precisely 6 seconds of careful consideration, she answered, "Yes. Yes, I will." The meal ended, and with a few more pleasant exchanges, they went to their respective places. The next morning, he was troubled. Did she say yes or did she say no? He couldn't remember. Try as he would, he just could not recall. Not even a faint memory. With trepidation, he went to the telephone and called her. First, he explained to her that he didn't remember as well as he used to. Then he reviewed the lovely evening past. As he gained a little more courage, he then inquired of her, "When I asked if you would marry me, did you say yes or did you say no?" He was delighted to hear her say, "Why, I said yes, yes, I will, and I meant it with all my heart." Then she continued, "And I am so glad that you called because I couldn't remember who had asked me." A little girl sat at the kitchen table, happily drawing a picture of her mom and dad with her crayons. As she doodled, she started wondering about families, her grandparents, great-grandparents, and where everyone came from. Curious, she asked her mom, "Mom, where do people come from? Do we all have families going back forever?" Her mom smiled and said, "Well, God created Adam and Eve, and they had children, and their children had children, and that's how it all began." The little girl nodded and went back to her drawing. A bit later, she went to her room to grab another crayon, and found her dad there fixing a shelf. She asked him the same question. Her dad replied, "Way back in time, humans evolved from monkeys." Now completely puzzled, she ran back to her mom and said, "Mom, you told me people were created by God, but Dad says we came from monkeys." Her mom chuckled and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I was telling you about my side of the family. Your dad was talking about his." One day, a farmer's donkey fell into a well. The poor thing cried for hours while the farmer tried to figure out what to do. Finally, he decided the donkey was old and the well needed covering anyway, so he called his neighbors to help bury it. They grabbed shovels and started tossing dirt, old junk, and old bits of wood from around the farm down onto the poor old beast. At first, the donkey protested even louder, then suddenly it went quiet. A few minutes later, the farmer peeked down, and couldn't believe his eyes. Every time something hit the donkey's back, he'd shake it off and take a step up. Shovel after shovel, plank after plank, he kept shaking it off and stepping up a little higher. Before long, the well was full, and that donkey climbed right out and trotted off like nothing had happened. Moral of the story. One day, a farmer's donkey fell into a well. The poor thing cried for hours while the farmer tried to figure out what to do. Finally, he decided the donkey was old and the well needed covering anyway. So he called his neighbors to help bury it. They grabbed shovels and started tossing dirt, old junk, and scraps down onto the poor old beast. At first, the donkey cried even louder, then suddenly quiet. A few minutes later, the farmer peeked down, and couldn't believe his eyes. Every time something hit the donkey's back, he'd shake it off and step up. Shovel of dirt after shovel of dirt, plank after plank, he kept shaking it off and stepping up a little higher. Before long, the well was full, and that donkey climbed right out and trotted off like nothing had happened. Moral of the story: life's gonna throw a lot of crap at you. When it does, shake it off, step up, and keep moving forward. A man went to the doctor and said, "My wife's pregnant, but we haven't had sex in over a year. I don't understand it." The doctor said, "It's what we in the medical profession call a grudge pregnancy." The man asked, "What's a grudge pregnancy?" The doctor replied, "Well, somebody's obviously had it in for you." Bob, who lived in Ohio, decided to go on a little road trip to Pennsylvania with his longtime buddy, Frank. They tossed their golf clubs in Bob's old pickup and hit the highway early one morning. After a few hours of driving, they ran straight into a nasty snowstorm. With visibility getting worse, they spotted a farmhouse and pulled into the driveway to ask for help. An attractive older woman answered the door, and they politely asked if they could stay the night. "I'd like to help," she said, "but I'm a widow and I live alone. Folks around here might start talking." Bob smiled and said, "Ma'am, we'd be perfectly happy to sleep in your barn. We'll be out of your hair at sunrise." The woman thought for a moment, then agreed. The two men settled into the barn and tried to get some sleep. By morning, the storm had passed, and they thanked her and went on their way. They ended up having a wonderful weekend playing golf. About 9 months later, Bob received a letter from a lawyer he'd never heard of. It took him a while to realize the letter was connected to that widow from the farm. Confused, Bob drove over to Frank's house. "Frank, remember that widow whose barn we stayed in during the snowstorm?" Bob asked. Frank nodded. "Did you, get up during the night and pay her a visit?" Bob asked carefully. Frank sighed and said, "Well, yes. I did." Bob swallowed and asked, "And did you tell her your name, or mine?" Frank turned red and said, "I told her your name. I'm really sorry." Bob broke into a big grin. "She just passed away, and left me her entire estate." Recently, a big manufacturing company decided to hire a few cannibals as part of a diversity initiative. During orientation, the HR manager smiled and said, "You'll get full benefits, access to the cafeteria. And just one rule, please don't eat any employees." The new hires nodded politely and promised to behave. About a month later, the supervisor called the cannibals into his office. "You've all been doing excellent work," he said. "Productivity is up across the board. But one of our receptionists has gone missing. Anyone know anything about that?" The cannibals all shook their heads and said, "Nope." After the supervisor left, their leader turned to the group and whispered, "Which one of you knuckleheads ate the receptionist?" One hand slowly went up. The leader groaned. "For weeks we've been eating supervisors and nobody noticed. And you had to go and eat the one person who actually does something." Miss Beatrice, the church organist, was well into her 80s and had never married. She was loved by everyone for her sweetness, kindness, and gentle spirit. One afternoon, the pastor stopped by for a visit. Miss Beatrice welcomed him into her cozy sitting room and invited him to sit while she prepared tea. As the pastor sat down, he noticed something unusual. On top of her old Hammond organ sat a cut glass bowl, filled with water, and floating inside it was a condom. When Miss Beatrice returned with tea and scones, they chatted pleasantly for a while. The pastor tried his best to ignore the bowl, but eventually curiosity got the better of him. "Miss Beatrice," he finally said, pointing to the bowl, "would you mind telling me about that?" "Oh yes," she said cheerfully. "Isn't it wonderful? I was walking through the park a few months ago, and found a little package on the ground. The instructions said to place it on the organ, keep it wet, and that it would prevent the spread of disease." She smiled proudly and added, "Do you know, I haven't had the flu all winter." A young man moved from his parents' home into a new apartment of his own and went to the lobby to put his name on his mailbox. While there, an attractive young lady came out of the apartment next to the mailboxes, wearing a robe. The boy smiled at the young woman, and she started a conversation with him. As they talked, her robe slipped open, and it was obvious that she had nothing else on. The poor kid broke into a sweat trying to maintain eye contact. After a few minutes, she placed her hand on his arm and said, "Let's go to my apartment. I hear someone coming." He followed her into her apartment. She closed the door and leaned against it, allowing her robe to fall off completely. Now completely nude, she purred at him. "What would you say is my best feature?" Flustered and embarrassed, he finally squeaked, "It's got to be your ears." Astounded and a little hurt, she asked, My ears! Look at these breasts. They are full and 100% natural. I work out every day and my butt is firm and solid. Look at my skin, no blemishes anywhere, so how can you think that the best part of my body is my ears? Clearing his throat, he stammered. Outside, when you said you heard someone coming, that was me. After 37 years of marriage, Jake dumped his wife for his young secretary. His new girlfriend demanded that they live in Jake and Edith's multi-million-dollar home, and since the man's lawyers were a little better, he prevailed. He gave Edith, his now ex-wife, just 3 days to move out. She spent the first day packing her belongings into boxes, crates, and suitcases. On the second day she had movers come and collect her things. On the third day she sat down for the last time at their beautiful dining room table by candlelight, put on some soft background music and feasted on a pound of shrimp, a jar of caviar and a bottle of Chardonnay. When she had finished, she went into each and every room and stuffed half-eaten shrimp shells dipped in caviar into the hollow of all of the curtain rods. She then cleaned up the kitchen and left. When the husband returned with his new girlfriend, all was bliss for the first few days. Then slowly the house began to smell. They tried everything, cleaning, mopping, and airing the place out. Vents were checked for dead rodents and carpets were cleaned. Air fresheners were hung everywhere. Exterminators were brought in to set off gas canisters, during which they had to move out for a few days, and in the end they even replaced the expensive wool carpeting. Nothing worked. People stopped coming over to visit. Repairmen refused to work in the house. The maid quit. Finally, they could not take the stench any longer and decided to move. A month later, even though they had cut their price in half, they could not find a buyer for their stinky house. Word got out and eventually even the local realtors refused to return their calls. Finally, they had to borrow a huge sum of money from the bank to purchase a new place. The ex-wife called the man and asked how things were going. He told her the saga of the rotting house. She listened politely and said that she missed her old home terribly, and would be willing to reduce her divorce settlement in exchange for getting the house back. Knowing his ex-wife had no idea how bad the smell was, he agreed on a price that was about 1/10 of what the house had been worth, but only if she were to sign the papers that very day. She agreed, and within the hour his lawyers delivered the paperwork. A week later the man and his girlfriend stood smiling as they watched the moving company pack everything to take to their new home, including the curtain rods. Jay Leno went into the audience to find the most embarrassing first date story, and the winner definitely had a tale for the ages. She began. It was midwinter, snowing, and freezing cold when her date took her skiing in the mountains outside Salt Lake City. It was just a day trip, no overnight since they were strangers. The day went fine until they were headed home late in the afternoon. The woman began feeling the consequences of that extra latte, realizing she wouldn't make it to the nearest restroom, an hour away, in the middle of nowhere. Her date suggested she hold it, but eventually, she had no choice but to ask him to stop so she could go by the side of the road. They pulled over, and she quickly scrambled out of the car, yanked her pants down, and squatted beside the vehicle for balance, using the rear fender to steady herself. Her date was a gentleman, standing to watch for traffic, giving her some privacy. She finally finished and went to pull up her pants, only to find her but was stuck to the cold fender. Horrified, she realized she was quite literally frozen in place. She called out to him that she was freezing her butt off and needed help. He rushed around to her side, but as soon as he saw her predicament, he burst out laughing. She couldn't help but join in, but soon the situation became clear. It would take something hot to unstick her. After a moment of silence, he realized there was only one thing to do. He unzipped his pants and peed on the car fender to melt the ice. The audience went wild with laughter. Jay Leno's comment? This gives a whole new meaning to being wee-weed off. And with that, she won the Tonight Show prize. Or, as she put it, pants down.